Warning: contains adult content including harsh language, violence, and sexual themes, and may not be suitable for people under age 17.
"Sorry, Mina," he said calmly, dabbing his saliva off her finger. "It was rash, but saliva helps to clot wounds faster than washing it off with water." She blinked, retracting her hand slowly. "Isn't that dangerous, though?" she asked in a hushed voice. Kodo smiled and shrugged. "Are you diseased, Miss Virgin?" he mocked. Mina glared and smacked his chest with the hand that hadn't been cut. "Shut up!" she exclaimed. She went to continue cleaning up the glass, but Kodo grabbed her wrist. "Stop," he said gently. "I'll finish up here. You need to go to work or you'll be late." Mina stared into his dark eyes for a moment, but nodded all the same. She stood up and applied a band-aid to the cut, just so she wouldn't accidentally rub it against something, and grabbed her bag. "I'm going to bring you home something," she said bluntly. He blinked at her. "What?" "I'll bring you home a cake or something." "What for?" Kodo asked. "For making that promise to me," she said with a soft smile. "For keeping me alive." Kodo's lips parted, and he stared at her until she turned and walked out the door. Kodo finished cleaning up the broken glass. He had mixed feelings of fear, excitement, regret, alleviation, and remorse. "I told you," said the voice. "I told you, didn't I? Now you're buried 6 feet under, and I don't think you'll get yourself out very easily." Kodo stood up and dumped the shards of glass into the trash. "Shut up," he growled at the voice, and he slammed the lid of the trash can shut. In less than 5 minutes, Kodo was strolling the streets again, knife in his pocket, angry and ready to do what he did best. It was overcast, and not many people were outside. "This is good," he thought. "More people are in their houses." He took one of the back streets that he had taken months ago, before he met Mina. He glanced at the house where he had killed that particular family, and saw that there was still a "for sale" sign in the front. He smiled menacingly to himself. He continued to walk up the street when he came across a small blue house. From the outside, it didn't look like anyone was home, but Kodo could hear the faint sound of music coming from one of the rooms on the second floor. All of the curtains were drawn so that no one could see in. And no one can see out, Kodo thought. As he crept around the house, he saw a sticker that looked fairly new sticking to one of the outer walls. "This house is protected by an anti-burglary system," Kodo scoffed. "So, an alarm, huh?" he thought. "Well, if they were smart, they wouldn't have forewarned me about their silly protection." Kodo snuck around until he found the power box. He silently pried it open with his knife and stared at the wires. There were so many, he couldn't figure out which one was powering the alarm. He smirked and decided to cut all of the wires. The music inside ceased. "Mom!" called a female voice from inside. "The power went out!" Kodo slithered around to the back door and crept inside. Since the curtains were closed, it was very dark in every room. Kodo's eyes were pretty used to the dark, so they adjusted quickly. He could see a shape of a woman in the hall, probably fiddling with the circuit breaker to try and fix the power. "It's not working!" called the woman to the voice that had shouted earlier. "I might have to call an electrician." Kodo came up behind her quick as a flash. He covered her mouth and cut open her throat, and then let her body drop to the floor. "Just call Kenji," called the first voice from upstairs. "He knows all about this stuff." There was silence as Kodo slowly started walking up the stairs. "Mom?" the girl called. "Mom, are you listening to me?" Kodo reached the top of the stairs and found the room where the voice was coming from. The girl flung open the door. She froze at the sight of the tall, lanky figure that was Kodo. Who? "Mommy's not listening," he growled and plunged the knife right into her heart. She sputtered and collapsed, gasping for a few seconds and then finally silencing. "That was easy," said Kodo to himself. "Almost takes the fun out of it." He went back down the stairs, jumping the last two and hurrying out of the house. He looked around. It was so quiet. He wanted to shake it up. He sprinted across the street and hid behind a brick wall turning to another street, and bellowed, "Help! There's been another murder!" The effect was instantaneous. People started rushing out of their houses, and Kodo smiled, slipping away unseen. Mina came home with a small cake box, presenting it to Kodo. He smiled up at her from the floor and took it, opening it graciously. It was a delicious-looking strawberry cheesecake. "You spoil me," he laughed, and Mina giggled, giving him a plastic fork. He ate the cake, loving the sweetness of it. He never really realized how fond he was of sugar. Mina turned on the news like she usually did during this time. There was no story on the murder just yet. Instead, they were reporting some kind of charity for children. Kodo didn't really care. It was about 20 minutes before the excitement came. "Two were found dead in their house earlier today," said the regular female anchor. "In a small house that was protected with an alarm system, the police found 2 women dead inside. The reason why the alarm didn't go off was because the wires to the electricity had been cut," said the chief of police. "It was very dark inside. Using flashlights, we found the mother dead in the hallway and the 21-year-old daughter dead in the doorway of her bedroom." "The victims were Kana and Saya Teruya," continued the anchor. "A single mother and her loving daughter had lived happy lives until The television had suddenly turned off. Kodo looked around at Mina, who was pale-faced, holding the remote. "Saya," she murmured, her lip trembling. Kodo blinked. "Saya?" he asked. His eyes widened. He remembered Mina telling him the first night he was here. "One of the first murders that occurred in this town happened on the same street as one of my best friend's house." Then he remembered something else. Just this morning, she was on the phone with Hima, and she mentioned Saya. Mina burst into tears, curling into a ball on the floor. Kodo was horrified. "What have I done?" he shouted in his head. He immediately grabbed Mina and held her tight, his face pale and eyes still wide. "She was my best friend," she cried hysterically. "My best friend, and now she's gone forever. I haven't seen her for over half a year, and I will never... Saya, no!" She continued to sob, her hands gripping her hair, threatening to rip it out. Kodo grabbed her wrist to prevent this. "Mina, please," he whispered. He felt terrible, which was strange because he had never felt guilty for killing anyone before this. "Mina, I can't comfort you if you're screaming." Mina tried to stifle her crying, starting to shake. "Mina, breathe. Breathe slowly." Mina tried her best to obey him, taking very deep but very shaky breaths. "Good." She stared up at him, eyes filled with glittering tears. "My best friend, Kodo," she squeaked. She and Hima are like sisters to me. We grew up together." She covered her face, still shaking. "What have I done? What have I done? What have I done?" he thought, panicking. "What have I done?" "Mina," Kodo said, trembling. She looked up at him, and Kodo couldn't find any words to speak. Without warning, he began to cry too. Mina blinked, a little surprised at his anguish, which she mistook for his grief over Saya. Kodo held her close, crying softly into her shoulder, and Mina closed her eyes, crying too. "Kodo," Mina whispered after a few minutes, "you're a wonderful person." Kodo's heart retched and he shook more violently. No, I'm not," he growled, furious with himself. Mina pulled away from him and looked him straight in the eye. "I think you are." Kodo met her gaze for several seconds, and then sniffled, wiping his eyes. You are a much more wonderful person than me," he muttered with a sad smile. Kodo was lying awake in bed, staring once again at the dark ceiling. He felt so much guilt for killing Mina's best friend, but he didn't know. He didn't know who she was, so he couldn't blame himself, right? Still, Mina's depression was caused by him and only him. He never thought he would ever regret killing someone. "I'm sorry," he thought, closing his eyes tightly. "I'm so sorry. I'll never kill anyone ever again." The malicious voice responded in a cold voice. "You don't mean that," it said. "You know you can't stop. It's like an addiction you can't fight. You need to kill to stay sane." Kodo laughed silently, opening his eyes. "To stay sane?" he said to the voice. "Seriously? I kill people and enjoy every second of it, and I hear this stupid voice in my head that I'm pretty sure isn't my conscience. I've already lost my sanity." The voice fought back. "But you'll fall even deeper into insanity. You'll frighten Mina if you quit killing people. You'll have strange panic attacks that will make her think you're unstable. You cannot run from this addiction." The voice began to laugh. "It's not like there's a rehabilitation center for murderers." Just then, Kodo heard a soft weeping coming from Mina's bedroom. It had to be almost 3 in the morning. "I guess she couldn't sleep either," he thought. Kodo stood up, catching a glance at the pair of metallic glowing orbs floating above the floor, which were Haku's eyes following him. He gently opened Mina's door and came inside. "Mina?" he whispered. She sniffled, shifting in her bed. "Yes?" she answered softly. Kodo sat on the bed beside her, pulling down the blanket slightly to see her face. It was streaked with tears. "I know you're upset," he said softly. "And granted, this is a great tragedy, and I'm sorry it had to happen to you." He was speaking the truth. "But you cannot beat yourself up." "It's hard, Kodo!" she exclaimed, sitting up. "She was my best!" Kodo put a finger to her lips. "I know she was," he muttered. "But do you think she would have wanted you to mourn so much that you can't even get to sleep? Would she have wanted you to give up your happiness and well-being for her? I don't think so. I think she'd love that you cared so much for her to cry at her demise. But I also think she'd want you to move on, be happy, and carry her in your heart." Mina had stopped crying at these words. You're absolutely right," she said, her voice strong. "Saya was such a happy girl. Nothing ever bothered her. Whenever I was sad, she'd smack my hand and say, 'That face you're making is so ugly. Why should a pretty girl like you force herself to be ugly?' And then she'd take my face and stretch it into a smile until I was laughing again." She giggled slightly. "It would be an insult to her memory if I dwelled on this sadness." "You are so strong," said Kodo, caressing her cheek without realizing what he was doing. "I don't want to see you making ugly faces either. You're so goddamn beautiful." He felt her smile, but she turned her head away, embarrassed. "Why do you say things like that?" she muttered, still smiling. Kodo forced her to look at him. "Because," he breathed, bringing her face closer to his, "you are so goddamn beautiful." Before he knew what he was doing, before it had even crossed his mind, he locked lips with her. She tensed, but a second later she relaxed and wrapped her arms around him, kissing him back. He gently laid her down on the bed, not breaking the kiss for even a second. Mina's hands found their way up his shirt, pulling it up to his shoulders. Kodo pulled away from her slowly, staring into her eyes. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. "I want you to show me your bad side," Mina whispered back, pulling Kodo's shirt off. He smirked, kissing her neck, his hand resting under her shirt on her ribcage. She wrapped her legs around him, tugging at the lining of his pants. Kodo slowly worked his pants off and proceeded to gently removing Mina's garments. He pressed against her, continuing to kiss her. their warm bodies touching in a passionate embrace.